So we were talking about personas today. First off, what is a persona? How do you use it? Why is it necessary?
Personas are, simply put, fictional people that are used in a business to help everyone understand who their customers, clients, and users are for whatever product or service that they're developing. Personas are often used in a marketing department. They're often used in, for example, software development in user experience. And they are also used by product owners, which is the perspective that I'm going to be talking about, to help their teams and the other stakeholders really understand those users of the product that they're building with Scrum. A persona is designed to represent, like I said, a fictional person, which means that it will have some information about like demographics and psychographics, for example. Like maybe a person's age will be specified. It's not an age range, it's a specific age, like Frank is 45. And then it will also have some sort of description of how that person, that fictional person, is related to the product that you're building with Scrum. And then it'll often have some, let's call it color, to fictionalize the person further. And you'll often have like a photo. And so that's the basic concept of a persona.
I have a very interesting question. We see this a lot of times in the industry, and that many people actually do not use personas. And it's usually a very, or at least from my experience that I'm noticing so far, there seems to be a pattern that people have user stories and whatnot, but they don't particularly humanize it. And why do you think that is? It's usually a very, when you talk to them about personas for the first time, they're very surprised that this is something to do.
Scrum has been part of the IT and high-tech world for quite a while now. In that context, personas were looked at as kind of a little bit of a joke, I have to admit. So personas existed before Scrum and Agile. So what's happened is that a lot of people doing Scrum, including the product owners, have a fairly strong technical background. And so they're used to thinking very abstractly. So they come up with like user categories or user roles, and they just stick with that. So for example, a job seeker, or a food truck operator, or whatever. And these roles and these like short phrases that describe these roles are considered good enough. Again, partly because people are used to thinking very abstractly. And so when I teach product owners about personas, I find that, yeah, it's very rare that they're used. And it's because of that sort of techie IT background, I think. The value of personas hasn't really been understood, except, more so in the marketing and user experience side of things. And that gets to really what is the value of a persona. And that's that a well-made persona creates empathy. That when a product owner presents their team with a well-made persona, there's the logical and data side of it, which is important, but more importantly, there's a story, and the story creates empathy. So why is that important? Well, because your techies want to be proud of their work. They want to know that they're having an impact, that they're contributing, and that the users and customers of the things that they're building are relevant. And so they're used to doing this very abstractly, right? Like with user roles. But by adding empathy into the equation, what happens is that people actually come up with better solutions faster, because they can literally put themselves, not literally, sorry, they can figuratively, emotionally put themselves into their client's shoes and say, oh, if I was that person, I would not like this, or I would love this, or whatever it happens to be, rather than thinking about how they themselves would want the system or the product to be built. They think about how your users and clients would want to be built. So if your persona's name is Frank, for example, if you have a good persona, you'll discover that your team starts talking about Frank, right? Like, oh, this thing where we have this configuration screen, it would be way better for Frank if we did it like this. Or, you know what, for this particular type of transaction, Frank doesn't need to be bothered with these details. Let's hide that from Frank because it's just going to annoy him, right? And so that's a very different than if you're talking about user roles, like job seeker. No one, that's dehumanizing, to use your phrase, basically. There is no official job seeker. Every job seeker is unique. And the more that you can narrow in on a single human being, the better. So a persona is a way of creating a single human being, humanizing the relationship that we have with our users and our clients.
It's kind of like it's very customer focused, very customer based. It's constantly actually thinking about how you can please your customer, how you can make them happy. And it kind of takes away from the isolated job of just creating the software or the service or what have you. So with that being said, what do you actually consider? I'm sure people out there are making all sorts of personas, which is not a bad thing, but I'm sure that there are good examples of personas and not so great examples of personas. So when you see a persona, what do you think are the components that create a well-made one?
I mentioned at a high level that, you always include some demographics, you include some description of the persona's relationship to the product, maybe some color details just for interest's sake, and a photo, but there's some things that make those work better or not. But I want to start by saying, like, you always evaluate the effectiveness of a persona based on how much your team actually talks about them by name, right? Like if you introduce a persona named Joseph and no one in your team starts talking about Joseph, right, it hasn't worked. It's not a good persona, whether you follow the formula or not. Okay. And so the key thing is like how well that persona lands. And again, you think about this, like, the movies, the stories that you've read where you just really love the characters, and you actually end up remembering their names and you start talking about them with your friends, like a TV show, for example. Oh my gosh, blah, 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 blah character, except you use their name and you're so excited to share with your friends about what happened to them in the last episode or what's gonna happen to them, right? Me and my wife are watching Downton Abbey right now, and we've been fascinated with the story of Mary and who she's going to marry and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, we're on season 3 now, so we know. But you remember the characters that you kind of fall in love with because of that empathy. So that's the key characteristic. That's the mark of success. And the way to achieve that is with a good story. The key idea in a persona is that when you're describing that character's relationship to your product, you have to tell a story. And every story, in order to be compelling and memorable, needs a couple of key things. Number one, you have to start by describing the character's normal life. Okay, what is it? What's normal for them? What's the current situation? You also have to give them a problem, and the problem has to be a compelling problem. So, it's possible to talk about certain, let's call them trivial or surface problems. But if you really want to do a good persona, you want to try and get down to something that is emotional or existential, right? A problem that the character is facing that's either going to threaten their livelihood or their life, or their emotional equilibrium. Okay.
Interesting.
And then you have to tell them what, like in the story, that is, you have to describe what their need is, but again, not at a surface level, but what they need at a deep personal level to satisfy the problem, to solve the problem. So this could be like a need to make a major contribution to other people. So for example, if you're talking about a food truck operator, he loves to see the smiles on people who eat delicious food, and it just makes him feel great. That's what he wants to accomplish. And so that's the need that you satisfy. It's not about making a buck. Yes, that's part of being a food truck owner, of course, but it's that joy that comes from contributing. Or having some sort of impact or significance, right? Like making the world a better place. That's another kind of deep, fundamental human need. Or sometimes it's about personal growth, right? Like going from a bad spot to a new good spot by developing skills and capacities and mindset. Like these are all very basic human needs. And if you can address the problem in terms of existential or emotional threat, and then identify the need in one of these basic human needs, and then connect it to your product or service, right? Then you have a compelling persona. A lot of times we feel very isolated in a Scrum team. We don't have that direct connection with our users or our clients, and we crave that connection. And again, a persona can be done well to help with creating that connection. Now, mind you, it's really important to remember that in a Scrum environment, you still have the sprint review, and every single sprint, you should have actual customers, actual clients, actual users coming to your sprint reviews and giving direct feedback. But what's interesting is that the persona actually serves an additional need, which is it's actually a risk management need. So the problem with real people is that sometimes they suck. And so what happens is sometimes the people who are coming to your sprint reviews annoy your team members, they insult them, or maybe there's a previous bad blood kind of relationship between them. And so it's not always possible to have empathy for the actual users and clients who come to a sprint review. You still need to do that because that's part of making sure that you're building the right thing, that you're building it at the right time, that you're making good business decisions as a product owner. But the persona allows you to short circuit any of the negative relationships that might exist between your team members and the actual people coming to your sprint review, so that you can still always have that empathy for your users and your clients.
So in other words, it's somebody that you should never know.
That's right. Yeah. Don't use a name or a photo of some real person. That's a huge no-no in creating personas, or the story background. So I've seen this sometimes where like a team member says, well, oh, I blah, 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 blah. And I would use this product myself. And then everyone's like, well, you're the persona then. No. Bad idea. And also related to that, especially with technical people, is that for technical people to believe a persona, there does actually have to be some research behind it, right? Like it's not just made up from whole cloth. It's like, yeah, as a product owner, you need to do some at least basic research in terms of demographics to make sure that your team doesn't go, this is ridiculous. We don't have any users like this, right? Like it's got to be believable in terms of the data as well as the story that you create.
So the PO has to really know their customer then well, or their potential customer very well, in order to actually create the thing that they would want to use, that would compel them to be like, I need this thing. Because I think that's kind of the goal when you create something, is that it's not just about like, I mean, you could make something that you want, but if you can drive that need and make it like a necessity, like dire, then you've won.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, you know, as a product owner, like I said, you've got the sprint reviews where you're going to have actual clients and users giving you feedback, and that may mean that over time you evolve your personas, right? You may discover that a persona that you create early on becomes less relevant over time based on the feedback process that Scrum has built into it.
So in other words, just like the iteration, the actual customer or the persona evolves too. It's never in a fixed state.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. We try and avoid excessive documentation, right? So we have to balance this. Like, I'm not saying that as a product owner, you spend weeks researching and then you build, you know, 20 personas for your team for all the different types of users. No. Do one at a time. You know, build a persona, see how it works with your team. Start with your most important users or clients. And when you build that persona, do a very light amount of research and crafting the persona. Like, take half an hour, maybe in total, to write the first draft of your persona. Take it to the team, check. Because again, if you're headed in the wrong direction and your team doesn't care about this made up person, even after that little bit of investment in time, it might mean that you're heading in the wrong direction and that you should start somewhere else. Eventually, you might have several personas that get built up over time for a single product. Depends on the complexity of your product, obviously. If your product is just for a single type of user, you might have even just one persona, or maybe two or three to show some variation in the actual kind of users that are there. But I would really recommend against having a library of personas. Your team should be able to just off the top of their head name all your personas. Like, if you go to your team and you say, hey, who are our personas? They should be able to say, well, there's Joseph, there's Frank, there's Imad, and you know, that's it. And they remember, that's it. They know their personas, right? If they have to think about it more than a few seconds, you've got too many, or they're not really working.
So it's like the investment of it. I mean, for a Scrum team, for Scrum Master, the PO, whoever attends any of, you know, the meetings, I guess part of the discussion would definitely facilitate it in such a way that it actually gets them talking about it. Because if they can talk about it, that means that they care.
Yeah, exactly. And again, so the key point about personas is creating that empathy so that your team makes good choices as they're building your product, and that the best way to create that empathy is with a story. And a story always has some sort of problem, crisis, conflict, and a clear, deep human need that persona is looking to sort of satisfy. And if you get those things in, I mean, a lot of the details are things that you'll experiment, try out. I think it's better to just kind of dive in and try something. You have to practice it a lot, and don't be afraid to throw personas away, to kill them. It's okay. If they don't work, they don't work. Yeah,
no, that was great. I learned actually more in the sense of like, oh, you're allowed to just throw them away. I'm like, because you'd think that maybe some people want to kind of like save it if they care about it, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
But no, you can throw it out. You don't have to care anymore about this. I know that sounds bad, but you should care about people. But I mean, this
care about the real people. Don't worry too much about the personas. Yeah.
How do you know when to throw somebody away?
Yeah. How do you know? Okay.
Persona, not the real the person.
Yeah. No. Of course. Yeah. The persona. I think the way that you decide if you throw away a persona is, number one, if your team for whatever reason no longer seems to have empathy for that persona. That's like, if that happens, throw them away, just for sure. But number two, it's possible that in the product development effort, they're no longer as important. That whether it's because of a shift in business strategy or a competitive change or whatever, you may decide, you know what, this particular persona is not one that we want to focus on anymore. And so you retire them. You don't kill them, but you retire them, right? And then you don't worry about it. And you might still have conversations occasionally about that persona, because good personas are very memorable, right? Your team will wonder, hey, where is Frank anyway? What have we done for Frank lately? Oh, nothing. But that's okay because of the strategy, right? They can be retired.